Hey, thank you for joining me. So today we've got something that is a very important topic for federal employees to know as they get ready to pivot from the end of their career into the beginning of the distribution phase. And that is a risk that is first introduced at that point called the sequence risk, really talking about the order of returns that we experience. So we'll go ahead and dive into our material today. But before we do, I want to mention quickly that today is just going to be a snack-sized bite diving into a couple of these concepts. But if you'd like to learn more about retirement recipes and see them in their entirety, we have the Well-Fed book that you can grab on Amazon here. That said though, when we are talking about retirement versus those risks that we experience earlier in our career, during our career we're building up our assets. So we're talking about how to manage your tax benefits, target date, the allocation on your accounts, get a sense of when you're going to retire. But in retirement planning, as in mountain climbing, most of the risk is on the descent. And as you can see here, a lot of what we're going to have to navigate in retirement are not concerns that exist during our career. One of the biggest ones here again is going to be sequence risk. So what this is referencing is the order of returns that you experience after you separate from service. We cannot control what the market does afterwards, so it's really important to understand your exposure there. So let's dive into sequence risk a little bit deeper here. Now, what this is going to first show is sequence of returns risk prior to retirement. So this individual has $1 million portfolio. What you're going to see on the left is that they have a positive experience with the returns that they earn on that portfolio. And so first off, you see this $1 million is growing in year one, growing in year two, getting up to 1.4 million in year three, and then we have our first down year bringing it to 1.25. Now, in the other hand, we're experiencing negative sequence of returns. So again, what you'll see here is that starts with a lower number, grows back up, gets back to almost being even, and at the end here, the balance in both of these accounts is exactly the same. Why is this? Well, that is because the order of returns does not matter if we're not taking anything out of the account. So if there's no distributions, it doesn't matter if the account was experiencing positive returns first or negative returns first. But watch how this changes, right? People aren't aware of this as they enter retirement because, as you can see here, it simply doesn't exist as a risk during your career. But in this example, both of these earned a 6% rate of return. And as you can see, they ended with the same exact dollar amount. Now, look at this same example where we're in retirement now with this $1 million account and living on $50,000 a year adjusted for inflation. Now, if we had the same exact experience where start with a positive return for 3 consecutive years, that means those distributions are spending gains. And what you can see here is that over the course of retirement, as we're spending that account down, if those returns repeated again and again, this account, $1 million, would last 36 years. Now, if we look at the opposite and we see a negative experience first, if the first movement of the market after you retire is downwards, now the distribution we need to pay the bills is coming out of our principal. And that is enough in changing the order of those returns. That is enough to take our account down to zero within 23 years. So if we compare these, both average a 6% rate of return, but you see the difference here is that the one that experienced a positive sequence to begin their retirement outlasted the one with the negative sequence by 13 years, even though both experienced a 6% average rate of return. So in looking at this, what I want to give you is a little bit more insight for the federal retirement. Looking at an example now of a federal couple that has a hefty starting nest egg, over 3 million here, but they're looking to spend $10,000 a month with the idea that, inflation's going to be about 3%. So With this, you can see up top, we've got their income streams all broken down, and then the desired budget at the top in blue. And it's showing how we are distributing from different accounts to meet that. Now in this first example, we go from about 3 million to about 1.2 million, 1.1 million here, as you can see, and there's no bear market. Now your average bear market, it's gonna be about 34-35% decline from top to bottom. They're gonna happen every 5.5 years or so. So over the course of a 25-year retirement, we gotta be ready to be going through maybe more than one bear market environment. So here what you can see is they get across the finish line, both enjoying retirement all the way through if there is no bear market. But here we introduce our bear market, 35% in the 90s for Mr. and Mrs. sample case, and you can see that it creates a little bit of a shortfall there just in the 95th year. But watch as we move this forward. If you have this experience further up Asset Mountain, we have further to fall, right? And so if the bear market happens earlier in your retirement, it means less of your money is there, but more of your retirement is. We might find ourselves, as you can see here, with too much life at the end of our money. And as this moves further forward, you can see that shortfall also moves with it. And this tells us that the time at which the impact of sequence risk is largest is at the very beginning of retirement. So as you can see here, that is enough to create a shortfall in the sample cases situation in their mid-80s. So how do we mitigate that? Well, what we're looking at here is our exposure to the market, because we simply can't control what the market does after you retire, but we can control how much we expose ourselves to it. So in this, what you see here is that at the beginning of your career, you can take a good bit more risk. And as we get into the period we call the decisive decade, the 5 years before and after you separate from service and begin the distribution phase, that is when your risk should be the lowest. And as you get further into retirement, you can expand that risk with what we call a rising equity glide path. But as you see on this graphic, there is no numbers assigned here. There's no right amount of risk or wrong amount of risk. What this is trying to highlight is that through all the different situations out there, through your value system, this is a relationship where risk moves in conjunction with the timeline. And at the beginning of your retirement, you have the longest to make that money last and the most to lose in terms of the money you've accumulated. So in looking at that, how do we go about gauging our risk there? Well, this is where we talk about what a portfolio does. So is there a perfect investment? Perfect investment would simply enjoy all of the good, all of the gains, none of the bad, suffer none of the bad, and be 100% liquid at any moment. But as you can see here, there's not many options out there that get even 2 out of these 3. Getting all 3 doesn't exist. So that becomes the job of the portfolio. We need the tools in our portfolio to create enough safety, enough growth, and enough liquidity so that we can get through different pieces of our retirement as our needs and timelines change. So if it's the job of your portfolio to balance your need for growth, for safety, and for liquidity, how do we balance a portfolio? Well, with Walker Capital, we talk about a risk number. So on a scale of 1 to 100, where 1 is very, very conservative and 99 is very, very speculative. And what we look at is 3 different components. First being, how much risk do you want? How much risk are you personally comfortable with in this environment? Second is looking at how much risk the budget says we need in terms of mapping out the sustainability of your retirement. Part of how much we need in terms of return can be discovered or defined by how much the budget requires once we have our Social Security and pensions figured out. The third piece then becomes, okay, if we know how much you want and how much the budget says you need to have, now we need to start by understanding what is currently going on in your budget, how much risk there currently exists. And once we know all of those different pieces, we can really start to gauge more accurately how much risk you should have. And it's at that time that we can really start looking into how to balance that portfolio. So this is something that we can help you with, and if you work with us, we do a complimentary consultation where part 1 is an introduction, just a chance to ask any questions, meet your retirement counselor, and also talk about some of the uniqueness of your situation, your timeline, your goals, your family situation. And then part 2 is looking at actually building a projection and reviewing with you the model, stress testing, and looking at different retirement timelines and what if, this happened, long-term care, what if inflation stayed high. So we can help you with all of that to stress test there. So that said, look forward to talking with you soon.